The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, catching the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the blinds. It was thick, the kind of stationery used for important occasions. My name, Ryan, was written on the front in elegant cursive. "What's this?" I muttered to myself, flipping it over. The seal bore the insignia of Langston Galleries, Natalie's workplace. I frowned. She hadn't mentioned anything about sending me an invitation. I opened it carefully, pulling out a cream-colored card. The gold embossed letters announced an exclusive auction event hosted by Gregory Langston, the gallery's enigmatic owner. Natalie had mentioned this event in passing, saying it was one of the most prestigious gatherings of the year. "Rare art pieces," she said, "worth millions." I smiled, imagining the surprise on her face if I showed up to support her. The event was set for 7 p.m. the following evening at Langston Manor, Gregory's sprawling estate just outside the city. The card emphasized a strict dress code, black tie. I decided not to tell Natalie. A surprise seemed fitting. The next evening, I adjusted my bow tie in the car's rearview mirror before stepping out. Langston Manor was more imposing than I'd imagined. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, their sleek bodies gleaming under the estate's floodlights. The mansion itself was an architectural marvel, a blend of classic European design with modern touches. Inside, the grandeur was almost overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and polished marble floors reflected the warm glow of the lights. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne. I spotted Natalie almost immediately. She was dressed in a shimmering black gown that hugged her figure, her hair styled in soft waves. She looked stunning, radiant even, but something about her demeanor caught my attention. She was laughing, one of those exaggerated, almost performative laughs, and leaning just a bit too close to Gregory Langston. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a commanding presence. His hand rested lightly on her back, fingers splayed in a way that felt too familiar. I stayed in the background, weaving through the crowd, careful not to draw attention to myself. As the evening progressed, I mingled with the other guests, a mix of the city's elite. Conversations revolved around art, investments, and philanthropy. I nodded along, but my attention kept drifting to Natalie. She seemed different. Nervous, maybe? Or was it excitement? She moved through the room with practiced grace, but her eyes darted around, as if she was constantly scanning her surroundings. At one point, I saw her and Gregory slip away from the main hall. I waited a beat before following. The hallway they disappeared into was quieter, lined with gilded mirrors and portraits. I stayed at a distance, listening for their voices. When I found them, they were in a small alcove, their heads close together. "Everything is set," Gregory was saying, his tone low but firm. "We can't afford any mistakes this time." Natalie nodded, her expression serious. "I know. Trust me, I've got it under control." I couldn't make out much more before they moved further down the corridor. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? I decided to let it go for the night. Confronting Natalie here would only cause a scene. But as I left Langston Manor, the feeling of unease gnawed at me. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what. The image of Natalie and Gregory in the hallway stayed with me, replaying over and over. Her hushed tone, the way she leaned in, the weight of their words. It was impossible to ignore. The next day, I acted like nothing had happened. Natalie came home late from the auction, her face lit with an almost unsettling glow as she tossed her heels by the door. "Long night?" I asked, sipping my coffee at the kitchen table. "You wouldn't believe how successful the event was," she gushed, brushing past me toward the fridge. "Gregory said it was one of our best yet. We raised millions." She didn't ask why I wasn't there. She didn't even mention the invitation. Her casual indifference made my skin crawl. I nodded along to her story, forcing a smile as she talked about the wealthy patrons, the art pieces, and the after-party. She was too polished, too rehearsed. That night, as Natalie slept, I scrolled through photos of the auction online. Society pages covered the event, showcasing the crowd, the art, and of course, Gregory Langston himself. Natalie appeared in several shots, always close to him. One photo showed her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile dazzling but shallow. I stared at it for a long time before closing the laptop. 2 days later, I had my chance. Natalie mentioned she'd be working late, prepping for another event. She didn't give me specifics, just that it was important. I pretended to be indifferent, kissing her goodbye as she left. The moment she was gone, I grabbed my keys and headed for Langston Galleries. The auction house was quiet when I arrived, its large glass doors reflecting the city lights. I parked down the street and waited, watching as people came and went. Gregory's car, a sleek black Mercedes, was parked in the private lot. I spotted Natalie's car too. I waited until the foot traffic died down before slipping into the building. The main gallery was dimly lit, the soft glow of recessed lighting illuminating the art pieces on display. I kept to the shadows, listening for voices. It didn't take long to find them. Their voices carried down the hall, low but intense. I crept closer, stopping just outside a slightly ajar door. Through the gap, I could see Natalie sitting on a leather couch, her legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand. Gregory sat beside her, leaning in close. "You've been amazing, Natalie," he said, his voice oozing with charm. "I don't know what I'd do without you." She laughed, that same exaggerated laugh from the auction. "Well, you did hire the best." Gregory reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, a small, almost flirtatious smile playing on her lips. "Don't sell yourself short," he murmured. "You're more than just an employee." The room felt like it was closing in on me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched them, frozen in place. Gregory leaned in closer, his hand resting on her thigh, and for a moment, I thought she'd stop him. She didn't. Their lips met, and I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I turned away, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Part of me wanted to storm in, to tear Gregory apart, but another part of me knew I needed to wait. This wasn't just infidelity, it felt bigger than that. As I left the gallery, the cool night air hit me like a slap. My mind was a storm of anger and disbelief. Natalie was hiding something, and it wasn't just an affair. Whatever this was, I was going to uncover it, no matter what it took. The days following that night were a blur of tension and quiet determination. Natalie continued her act, laughing over breakfast, scrolling through her phone, and pretending nothing was amiss. It was almost impressive how easily she lied. For my part, I pretended too. Pretended I hadn't seen her kiss Gregory, pretended her late nights didn't bother me, pretended I wasn't piecing together the truth behind her charade. It started with her laptop. One morning, Natalie left it open on the kitchen counter while she showered. The screen had gone dark, but with a quick tap on the trackpad, it came to life. Her email was open, the cursor blinking in a draft she hadn't finished. I scanned the contents quickly. Gregory. Attached are the updated client accounts and projected figures for the November auction. I've made the adjustments we discussed to ensure the pieces. I didn't need to read further. Adjustments? Figures? It sounded innocent enough, but my gut told me otherwise. I copied the email onto a USB drive I kept in my desk, feeling a pang of guilt I quickly dismissed. Natalie had forfeited the right to privacy the moment she kissed Gregory. My next step was digging into Gregory Langston himself. It didn't take long to find dirt on him. A quick search of public records revealed several lawsuits, most of them settled out of court, involving fraud and breach of contract. A few clicks deeper into forums and anonymous posts painted an even darker picture. Rumors of counterfeit art sold as originals, shady deals with offshore buyers, and whispers of money laundering. I started spending my evenings parked near Langston Galleries, watching the comings and goings. Most nights, the building was dark, but occasionally I'd see Gregory's car or Natalie's, their silhouettes moving through the second-floor offices. One night, I followed Natalie when she left. Her route wasn't the usual one home. Instead, she drove to a warehouse in an industrial district. The building was unmarked, with no signs or logos to identify it. I parked a block away and waited. She was inside for over an hour. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. Gregory was with her, along with another man I didn't recognize, a burly, rough-looking guy with a shaved head and a leather jacket. They spoke briefly before parting ways. Natalie returned to her car, and Gregory walked with the other man to a black van parked nearby. Something was happening here, something bigger than late-night rendezvous. Back home, I dug deeper. Using a mix of browser history, emails, and documents saved on Natalie's laptop, I began to piece together the puzzle. It was worse than I'd imagined. Langston Galleries was a front. Behind the glitz and glamour of its auctions, the business was a well-oiled machine for laundering dirty money. Fake invoices and forged certificates of authenticity accompanied counterfeit art pieces sold to unsuspecting buyers at inflated prices. The profits were then funneled through shell companies, erasing their criminal origins. Natalie wasn't just an accomplice, she was pivotal. Her charm and professionalism made her the perfect liaison between Gregory and their high-profile clients. She handled the logistics, smoothed over any suspicions, and ensured the operation ran like clockwork. What chilled me most was how comfortable she seemed in her role. Emails and text messages I found between her and Gregory revealed a level of calculation I hadn't thought her capable of. One evening, as Natalie showered, I retrieved her phone. I'd memorized her passcode months ago, back when I still trusted her. Buried among the innocuous messages to friends and family were strings of texts with Gregory. Gregory, Marcus will handle the shipment. Make sure the clients don't ask too many questions this time. Natalie, don't worry. They trust me. They won't look too closely. Natalie, Ryan doesn't suspect anything. He's too distracted with work. Gregory, good. Let's keep it that way. The words made my blood run cold. They were talking about me. I scrolled further, finding references to offshore accounts, fake identities, and plans to expand their operation to other cities. That's when I found the files. Gregory had sent Natalie scanned documents, bank statements, contracts, and legal paperwork, all forged to make it look like I was involved in the laundering scheme. If the operation fell apart, I'd take the fall. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Natalie wasn't just lying to me. She was setting me up to take the blame for her crimes. I sat in the dark living room long after Natalie had gone to bed, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in my mind. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't even about the money. This was betrayal on a scale I couldn't fathom. But if they thought I'd go down quietly, they were wrong. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to destroy them. The house felt colder after what I'd uncovered. Every glance from Natalie, every laugh, every soft touch, all of it felt tainted now. She wasn't just lying. She was plotting, scheming to ruin me while keeping that cool, unbothered exterior. I couldn't confront her yet. Confronting her without evidence would only tip her off, and she'd wriggle out of it with more lies. Instead, I doubled down, methodically collecting every piece of proof I could find. The first thing I did was install a hidden camera in the living room, pointed at the couch where Natalie often took her calls. She always used the same spot, lounging with her wine glass in hand like she didn't have a care in the world. It wasn't long before the camera paid off. One evening, I sat in my car parked down the street, watching the live feed from my phone. Natalie was on the couch, speaking to Gregory. "Ryan's been acting weird," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "Has he seen anything he shouldn't?" Gregory's voice was sharp, almost paranoid. "Not that I know of. He's clueless as ever. Too busy playing the perfect husband." The smirk on her face made my stomach turn. "Good. We're too close to risk anything now." Marcus finished the paperwork. Ryan's name is all over it. If the feds come knocking, they'll go straight for him. Natalie laughed. "Poor Ryan. He won't even see it coming." I clenched my fists so tightly the leather of the steering wheel creaked. The next step was digging deeper into their finances. Using the information I'd pulled from Natalie's laptop, I accessed one of the shell company accounts tied to Langston Galleries. It was registered under the name RL Enterprises, a subtle nod to me. The transactions were damning. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moved between offshore accounts, all traced back to my supposed business. The bastards were setting me up as the mastermind behind their operation. I printed everything: bank statements, email chains, photos from the hidden camera. I even recorded my own screen as I navigated the shell accounts. Every piece of evidence went into a file I labeled Justice. One night, I stayed late at the office, combing through everything I'd gathered. My coworker, Josh, popped his head into my office. Still here? Thought you'd be home by now. I forced a smile. Just catching up on some work. You okay, man? You've been looking stressed. I hesitated. Josh was a good guy, but this wasn't something I could share. Not yet. Just some personal stuff, I said, brushing it off. He nodded, but the concern in his eyes lingered. The final blow came a week later. Natalie had left her phone charging in the kitchen while she took a long bath. I knew she wouldn't hear me, so I picked it up and checked her messages. Gregory had sent a new text. Shipment is in. Need to meet tomorrow night at the warehouse. Bring Ryan's signature. Marcus will finalize the documents. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. They had forged my signature. I opened Natalie's email and found the attachment Gregory had mentioned. It was a scanned document, a contract implicating me in the sale of counterfeit art. My name and signature were at the bottom. That night, as Natalie slept, I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. She looked peaceful, like someone who didn't have a care in the world. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold, calculated. I wasn't going to yell, wasn't going to scream. When the time came, I would let the truth speak for itself, and Natalie's perfect little world would crumble around her. But I couldn't do it alone. The next morning, I made a call. Detective Monroe speaking. Her voice was sharp, professional. My name is Ryan. I have information about an art forgery and money laundering operation tied to Langston Galleries. I also have evidence that they're trying to frame me. There was a pause. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? I have everything you need, I said. Bank statements, emails, recordings, even a forged contract. But I need your help to take them down. There was another pause, longer this time. Finally, she said, all right, bring me everything you have. Let's see what we're dealing with. I hung up, my heart pounding. Natalie and Gregory thought they were untouchable, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Detective Sarah Monroe wasn't what I expected. She was sharp-eyed and businesslike, dressed in a tailored blazer that spoke of authority. When I met her in her cramped office at the precinct, she wasted no time with pleasantries. You said you have evidence, she began, motioning for me to sit. I handed her the file I'd prepared. Everything you need is in here. Emails, forged documents, financial records. It's all connected to Gregory Langston and Langston Galleries. My wife, Natalie, is involved too. She arched a brow, flipping through the file. This is a lot. If what you're saying is true, we're looking at a major operation. But this isn't enough to build a case. What do you mean? She set the file down. We need something concrete. Direct involvement. A confession, or catching them in the act. Without that, it's your word against theirs. I leaned back, frustration bubbling to the surface. So what now? She folded her hands on the desk. We need to set a trap. Something that leaves no doubt. Back home, I felt the walls closing in. Natalie breezed through the door that evening, flashing me a smile as she kissed my cheek. Hey, how was your day? She asked, slipping out of her heels. Same as always, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. How about you? Oh, busy. Gregory's been piling on the work lately. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly it almost sounded believable. I played my part, nodding and asking just enough questions to seem interested. All the while, my mind raced. The next day, I reached out to Olivia, my sister. She was the one person I could trust completely, the one who'd always had my back. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, I told her everything. Natalie's setting you up? Olivia's voice was sharp, her hands tightening around her mug. Yes, and Gregory is the mastermind. I have proof, but I need help taking them down. She didn't hesitate. What do you need me to do? I handed her a copy of the evidence I'd given Detective Monroe. I need you to hold on to this. If something happens to me, make sure it gets to the authorities. Olivia's expression hardened. Nothing's going to happen to you, Ryan. We'll handle this. Her confidence bolstered me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. The next move came from Detective Monroe. We'll set up a sting at their next auction, she told me over the phone. I'll need you to attend, but don't confront them. Just play along and let us do the rest. The plan was straightforward. The auction would proceed as usual, but Monroe and her team would be undercover, monitoring every interaction. Hidden cameras would capture everything, and when the time was right, they'd make their move. The night before the auction, Natalie was unusually affectionate. She draped herself across the couch, resting her head on my shoulder as we watched TV. "You've been so patient with me," she murmured, her fingers tracing idle patterns on my arm. "Why wouldn't I be?" I replied, keeping my voice steady. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know. Work's been so crazy lately. I feel like I've been neglecting you." I kissed her forehead, hiding the disgust that boiled beneath the surface. "You're worth the wait." Her smile widened, and for a moment, I wondered if she truly believed her own lies. The day of the auction, I dressed carefully in a sharp black suit. Natalie was already gone, having left early to finalize preparations. At Langston Manor, the atmosphere buzzed with the same energy I'd felt at the first auction. Guests mingled, glasses of champagne in hand, as waiters moved discreetly through the crowd. Natalie was the perfect hostess, gliding from group to group with effortless charm. Gregory stood nearby, his presence commanding, but his gaze often drifted toward her. I played my part, smiling politely and engaging in shallow conversations. But my focus was on Monroe and her team, scattered throughout the room in plain clothes. As the auction began, I positioned myself near the back, blending into the crowd. The bidding was fierce, with absurd amounts of money exchanged for art that I now knew was fake. Monroe's voice crackled through the earpiece she'd given me. "Stay in position. We've got eyes on Gregory and Natalie." My pulse quickened as I spotted Gregory slipping into a side room, followed moments later by Natalie. This was it. I moved carefully, following at a distance as Monroe's team converged. Through the slightly open door, I saw Gregory handing Natalie a document. "This one's for the Zurich account," he said. "Make sure it's uploaded tonight." Natalie nodded, tucking the paper into her bag. "It's handled. By the time anyone notices, it'll be too late." Monroe's voice came through the earpiece. "We're moving in. Stand by." Seconds later, the door burst open and agents swarmed the room. Gregory's expression shifted from smug confidence to stunned disbelief, while Natalie froze, her composure shattered. "What the hell is this?" Gregory demanded, his voice rising. "FBI. Hands where we can see them," one of the agents barked. Natalie turned to me as I stepped into the room, her eyes wide with shock. "Ryan, what's going on?" I stared at her, my voice cold. "Justice." As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. Natalie had made her choice, and now she'd face the consequences. The aftermath of the sting operation was chaos. The once glamorous Langston Manor was overrun with law enforcement, guests whispering in shock as Gregory Langston, Natalie, and several of their accomplices were led out in handcuffs. The glint of blue and red lights flashed through the tall windows, cutting through the dim, elegant ambience of the auction hall. I stood at the edge of the room, watching as agents cataloged evidence. Boxes of forged documents, counterfeit art pieces, and even a ledger detailing their offshore accounts. Every piece of their carefully constructed empire was being dismantled right before my eyes. Natalie's gaze met mine as she was marched past, her face pale but defiant. "Ryan, you don't understand. They've got it all wrong," she shouted, her voice desperate. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd chosen her path, and now she was neck-deep in the consequences. Gregory wasn't nearly as composed. He fought against the officers, shouting about legal representation and making thinly veiled threats. His arrogance was nauseating, but it didn't matter now. His empire was crumbling, and there was no escaping it. Detective Monroe approached me as the chaos began to subside. "Your evidence was invaluable," she said, flipping through a notepad. "But this operation was bigger than we thought. Langston Galleries wasn't just laundering money. They were trafficking stolen art from overseas. Your wife was right in the thick of it." The words hit like a punch to the gut, even though I'd already suspected as much. Monroe gave me a hard look. "You did the right thing, Ryan. But this isn't over yet. There's a long legal process ahead, and it's going to get messy." "Messy doesn't scare me," I replied, my voice firm. She nodded, then gestured toward a nearby officer. "Take him through the evidence we're cataloging. You'll want to see just how deep this goes." As I walked through the makeshift evidence room, the scale of the operation became clearer. Paintings, sculptures, and artifacts filled the space, many of them flagged as counterfeit. A large whiteboard detailed the flow of money, clients, offshore accounts, shell companies. My name appeared more than once, a chilling reminder of how close Natalie and Gregory had come to framing me for their crimes. I recognized the forged contract from the documents I'd uncovered. Seeing it here, with official FBI labels and notes attached, felt surreal. One of the agents explained how the operation worked, their words confirming everything I'd suspected. Natalie had been instrumental in gaining the trust of wealthy clients, using her charm and intelligence to shield Gregory's more overtly suspicious activities. It was both impressive and sickening. By the time I left Langston Manor, the night was quiet again, the flashing lights replaced by the soft glow of street lamps. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of the evening settled over me. Natalie's betrayal had cut deeper than I'd realized. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the complete erosion of trust, the cold calculation of her actions. She'd not only chosen to lie and cheat, but she'd been willing to destroy me to save herself. The thought made my jaw tighten. But this wasn't the time for introspection. I still had work to do. The next morning, I filed for divorce. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Valerie, was already familiar with the case. "With the evidence you've provided, this should be a straightforward process," she assured me. "The court will take her criminal activity into account. You'll have the upper hand." I nodded, grateful for her competence, but too exhausted to feel triumphant. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the auction house sting rippled through the city. Gregory's name was splashed across every headline, his once sterling reputation reduced to nothing. Natalie, too, became a public spectacle. Pictures of her being escorted into court circulated online, accompanied by damning headlines about her role in the operation. I avoided the media frenzy as much as possible, focusing instead on rebuilding my life. Olivia was my rock through it all, her unwavering support keeping me grounded. "You did everything you could, Ryan," she said one evening over dinner. "Natalie made her choices. Now you get to make yours." She was right. Natalie had chosen greed and deception, but I could choose integrity and a fresh start. By the time Natalie and Gregory faced trial, I felt a strange sense of detachment. Watching her in court, sitting beside Gregory as the charges were read, didn't hurt the way I thought it would. She avoided my gaze, her once confident demeanor replaced by a brittle facade. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel anything at all. Natalie had become a stranger to me, someone I no longer recognized or cared to know. As I packed up the house we'd once shared, I came across little remnants of the life we'd built together. A photograph from our honeymoon, a love note she'd written years ago. For a moment, I felt the sting of what could have been. But those feelings passed quickly. I loaded the last box into my car and looked back at the house one final time. It wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. With a deep breath, I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, leaving the past behind. The house was gone. The marriage was over. Natalie's trial had closed the chapter on everything we once were. Now, it was time for me to figure out who I was without her and the lies she'd built our life around. I moved into a modest apartment on the other side of the city. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the alley, but it was mine. No reminders of Natalie, no echoes of her voice, no lingering scent of her perfume. It was a blank slate. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Without Natalie, the silence felt heavier. But I filled the space with purpose. Long hours at work, early morning runs, and late nights sorting through the wreckage of my old life. Olivia was a constant presence, her support unwavering. She came over often, bringing dinner and reminding me to laugh. "You're going to be fine," she said one night, a glass of wine in hand. "Better than fine, actually. You've got a fresh start now. Not everyone gets that." She was right, even if it didn't feel that way yet. The divorce proceedings were swift, thanks to the mountain of evidence against Natalie. Her involvement in Gregory's operation left her with no leverage, and the court had no sympathy for her. Valerie, my lawyer, was ruthless. She ensured that Natalie's criminal activities were well documented, leaving no room for negotiation. The house, our savings, what was left of them, and every material tie we'd shared were severed. When the final paperwork arrived, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I'd fought so hard to free myself from Natalie's betrayal, but now that it was over, the absence of the fight left a void. As Gregory and Natalie's trial gained national attention, their names became synonymous with scandal. Every detail of their scheme was dissected in the media, from the forged art pieces to the offshore accounts. Natalie's role as Gregory's trusted confidant became a focal point, and her once bright reputation was tarnished beyond repair. I avoided the news, though Olivia kept me updated. "They're going to prison," she said one evening, showing me the latest headline. "Gregory's looking at decades, and Natalie isn't far behind." I nodded, the news washing over me without much emotion. One day, as I sorted through the last box of papers from the house, I found a letter from Natalie. It was dated a week before the sting operation. "Ryan, I know I've hurt you, and I know you'll never forgive me. I didn't mean for things to go this far, but now it's too late to stop. Gregory has too much power, and I was too weak to walk away. I don't expect you to understand, but I want you to know I loved you once." I stared at the letter for a long time before tearing it in half. Whatever love she'd claimed to have for me was buried under lies and deceit. Her words meant nothing now. Months passed, and the fog began to lift. The city felt brighter, my steps lighter. I found myself reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd long neglected. I started painting again. Nothing fancy, just abstract pieces that helped clear my mind. One afternoon, Olivia stopped by with a housewarming gift, a set of new brushes and a blank canvas. "You need to fill this place with something that's yours," she said, grinning. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. The day Gregory and Natalie were sentenced was unremarkable. I didn't attend the hearing, choosing instead to take a long walk along the river. When I returned to my apartment, Olivia had left me a voicemail. "It's done. Natalie got 7 years, Gregory 25. Thought you'd want to know." I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the skyline. The weight I'd carried for months seemed to ease, bit by bit. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The life I'd built with Natalie was gone, but so were the lies and betrayal that had poisoned it. Now, I had a chance to live for myself, to build something real, something honest, and I wouldn't waste it. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.